Well, I'd like to welcome you all to the Phoenix Rising podcast, where we dive into science, nutrition, and personal stories and strategies that help people with brain health. Today, we're exploring the APOE4 gene, which is one of the strongest genetic risk factors for dementia, and most importantly, what you can actually do about it. We have two really great guests that have actually reached out to us with interest and have taught me a lot. Dr. Stewart Knoepp, a physician scientist trained at Harvard and MIT, and a board certified pathologist, and nurse Jeannie Capone, a psychiatric nurse practitioner specializing in brain health, hormone balance, and preventative strategies. And we plan on covering a lot of really interesting things that are science and into the weeds, but also do affect us. So, first, Dr. Stewart, I know you've spent years in academic and clinical settings, but I want to give you an opportunity to give your background professionally and around this topic.
So my right now I work as a pathologist, and the way I describe pathology to people is we two things. First, any type of laboratory test, laboratory medicine, blood tests, anything to do with the laboratory, we are the physicians that oversee that and should know about all kinds of laboratory tests, how to interpret them, how to run them. And so we consult with other physicians a lot in that regard. And that's clinical pathology. So I do that. And then the other thing I do is anatomic pathology, which is anytime you hear the word biopsy, we read all the biopsies. We see make a lot of cancer diagnoses, that sort of thing. But my interest in APOE4 and in Phoenix Health Sciences and the product we're talking about, and omega-3s in general, really relates to my role as a clinical pathologist, where I counsel other physicians on these types of tests and the importance of omega-3s and just everything to do with that. And I wanted to say at the outset that, yes, I reached out to Brett because I found out about Lysoveta through a pretty obscure bit of research I was doing on this topic that led me to you. And but I just wanted to say at the outset that you're not paying me. I'm not being paid. I have no relationship like that, nor would I accept a relationship like that, because that's not why I'm here. In a good way, because I think it's important that we talk about this. So I'm just volunteering my time, and I'm very happy to do that. Grateful to you to be hosting this and to be talking about it. So I'm pleased to be here.
No, I appreciate that, and that's actually really worth mentioning. So I'm, the chief science officer for Phoenix Health Science. We market nutritional supplements, but one of the reasons why we wanted to do podcasts is because I'm not a doctor like you, and I can't make any kind of medical advice. But a lot of people do have, are looking for information about what they're facing in their own life. And so the purpose of these podcasts is to have other people tell stories that I can't, but also things I don't know about. And Jeannie, you found us also. Can you tell us your background and what your interest is here?
Yeah, and thanks for having me. And I want to echo what Stewart said, which is that I'm loving here to be here and be on here because I was so excited to learn about LPC-DHA that I went on Amazon to buy it, and I couldn't find it. It didn't exist yet. It was only available from you and from some other company that didn't seem to be from that. So that's, my connection to connecting with you and, talking to you about both and, being so excited about what you're doing. And not only, am I not here, for money or fame or anything like that, I'm also not here to give medical advice. So anything I say is the most accurate to my abilities, but I'm not, anyone's doctor here. I'm not anyone's nurse practitioner. What we have to say all the time. unless we're in session with an actual patient. So I'm a nurse practitioner. I'm a psych and family NP with a background in obesity medicine, and currently have my own psychiatric practice in Massachusetts called Psychiatry. And in my spare time, I'm trying to, learn as much as I can about APOE4, because I found out that my mom has Alzheimer's disease and she has 2 puppies, which means that I guarantee that I have at least one puppy. So, I'm in my 40s now, so it's time for me to do everything I can to protect my brain. And so that's kind of the energy I want to share today, is just, that there's some optimism and that there's some things we can do if we are concerned about our future brain.
That's actually really relatable, because like for myself, as you get older and you know that things start breaking, like you do have to start paying more attention to what you eat, what you do, how you use your brain, how you spend your time. But this is actually a really good combination. So Jeannie, you actually see people, and then Dr. Knoepp, you're actually looking at the tests and the lab results and the clinical data that help with the doctors who are actually seeing the patients. So this is kind of you get kind of both sides of the medicine practice. But so I started off by saying we're going to talk about APOE4. Who wants to take a stab at what that is?
Well, I can try that. So APOE4 is a gene that is the APOE gene. It's a variant of the APOE gene, which we all have, all humans have. And there's a few variants of that. We don't call them mutations, we call them polymorphisms, because mutation usually that's reserved for something that's bad. But just variations like eye color, that sort of thing, we call them polymorphisms. So the APOE gene has several different polymorphisms, and those are E2, E3, and E4. So, and since we each have a gene one from mom and one from dad, each of us has 2 of those. So there's 6 possible combinations: 2-2, 2-3, 2-4, 3-3, 4-4, and so on. So APOE4 is one of those genes, and it's an important gene because it turns out the APOE4 gene is the single biggest risk factor genetically for late onset Alzheimer's disease. And about 25% of the population of humans has at least one copy of APOE4. And it's important to say that at the outset that it neither guarantees that you're going to get Alzheimer's, nor is it a prerequisite to get Alzheimer's.
It's a risk factor.
Yeah, so you can have APOE4 and not ever get Alzheimer's, and then conversely, you can have Alzheimer's disease and not have APOE4. But having said that, 2/3 of individuals that have late onset Alzheimer's, if you look at them, have APOE4, at least one copy of the gene, which means that that's higher than the general population. The general population, 25% have it, whereas 2/3 of individuals have it. Of those polymorphisms, 2, 3, and 4, 3 is considered neutral risk for Alzheimer's, 2 is slightly protective, and 4 is higher risk. If you have 3, 2 copies of 3, which is considered neutral, you have less than 9% risk overall of having of Alzheimer's. If you have 1 copy of APOE4, you have about a 30% lifetime risk. And then if you have 2 copies of it, which is pretty rare, it's only about 2% of the population, you have typically over a 50% risk of Alzheimer's. So that's how I would describe that, just in a broad sense. And I would just say the reason I think Jeannie and I are here to discuss this is because these risk factors are for people that live normally. There are things you can do to mitigate your risk big time. And that's why we're here to discuss it, because we're excited about that. very excited about that. So I think those risk factors go out of the window when we start talking about supplements and lifestyle factors and what we know about the science.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's just another one of those balancing genetics and the environment, because our life is a mix of nature and nurture. Um, one of the things that Jeannie had talked about with me is that in part of what you would like to communicate is that moving beyond looking at just the amyloid hypothesis with relation to Alzheimer's. What do you mean by that? If you were to say to look beyond the amyloid hypothesis?
Well, actually, one of the things I like to add to Stewart's comment, then, excellent description about APOE4 being a risk factor, is another reason I think for the pathology of it, which I can't wait to hear your thoughts on too, which is that it's not only associated with Alzheimer's disease, but it's also associated with a lot of vascular problems. And when we're talking about vascular problems, we're talking about inflammation. We're talking about arteries, veins in the body, but also in the blood-brain barrier, and also the tiny little capillaries of the brain. So, the reason why people get Alzheimer's because of APOE4 isn't just like a lottery ticket. It's this complex, decades-long cascade of events that isn't just amyloid, it's inflammation.
Which goes to what Dr. Knoepp was saying, is that the lifestyle things that you can do to mitigate the genetic factors. So I don't want to derail this because I think it is actually relevant, but I saw a short like 2 days ago that said that, like, before we used to think that cholesterol was indicative of cardiovascular risk, and the analogy they made was like, that's like showing up at every like arson and seeing a whole bunch of firemen, thinking that it's because there are firemen always at the scene of the arson that it's the firemen's that are causing that. I didn't know what it meant by that. So the metaphor is that cholesterol is evidence of inflammation. How does that work with, because APOE4 or the I can't say the name, apolipoprotein, was that right for APOE?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, but that does play a role with cholesterol and lipoproteins, and to your point, Jeannie, inflammation. I'm sorry, that was like a whole bunch. Can so
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I don't have much to add to that, other than I never want to be a fireman.
Well, I guess it's that cholesterol, we're finding out, is not a bad thing necessarily.
Neither is APOE4. Neither is APO like a protein, right? Like, don't we think that it's evolutionarily because it's like an antiviral or antimicrobial? No. Development by the body. So it's things in the body not necessarily good or bad. It's how much of it feeds for us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think that's exactly right. I mean, I would even go so far as to say there's nothing wrong with APOE4. The more we know about APOE4 itself, we find that there are actually some benefits to APOE4. There's increased fertility. There's some changes in cognition, which are beneficial, especially for younger individuals with respect to memory. So, and I think, Jeannie, what you're getting at is that it actually helps. Inflammation is a good thing if you have an infection. So, one of the thoughts is that if you have a parasitic infection, which was far more common when we were evolving before, when we lived in the woods and in caves, that APOE4 was beneficial, because if you had parasites or other infections, they mobilized inflammation to the right spot, to clear those infections.
Mhm.
So totally agree with all that. Getting to Brett's question about the firemen and cholesterol, I mean, it's very complicated. So first of all, you're right. There's nothing, cholesterol is not bad. I mean, cholesterol is an absolute required substance in all of our cells for life. We wouldn't be alive without cholesterol. Cholesterol is critical. We make it, our bodies synthesize it, and it's a critical component. And when doctors talk about cholesterol, you have high cholesterol or bad cholesterol. It's all context dependent. So, we've all heard about HDL versus LDL cholesterol, good bad cholesterol, bad cholesterol. So it depends on what cholesterol we're talking about, and it gets very complicated very quickly. With LDL, it's important which is the quote unquote bad cholesterol. It has to do with how big are your LDL particles? Do you have small particles which are not good, or big particles which are okay, and things like that. But the way I would describe APOE is that you have lipoproteins floating around in your bloodstream that contain cholesterol and fatty acids, and these are fat soluble substances, and your blood is water based, and as we all know, oil and water don't mix. So in order to transport cholesterol and fatty acids around in your blood and in your brain, they need a carrier. So they are packaged up in these little particles, like little packages, and they deliver important substances like cholesterol to your tissues and around in your brain. And I would view APOE as analogize that to like an address label on a package. The APOE is telling it where to go. Okay. And so, and specifically what it does is the APOE is on this little lipid protein particle, and the APOE binds to a receptor. And that's, the receptor is what specifies where that particle is going and what it's doing. So that's the address label, going to the right address.
Okay, so
that's what APOE does.
So why is it that APOE4, like what's going on that increases the risk for cognitive issues later on?
So the basic, on a molecular level, what's going on with APOE4 versus APOE3 or APOE2 is the binding affinity for that receptor is much, much stronger. So APOE4 has a very high binding affinity compared to 3 or 2. And again, that depending on where we're looking at, whether we're in the brain or in the blood vessel, in the vasculature, there's complicated downstream effects, and we could write a whole lecture on this topic. It gets complicated very quickly. But as far as the brain goes, there's a lot of. So one of the things that is happening is that APOE binds very tightly not only to the receptors that it should bind, but it also binds receptors that are meant for glucose. And it binds these glucose receptors, GLUT1 in the brain, GLUT4 outside of the brain. And it binds them so tightly that it kind of fouls up these receptors and they no longer work very well. And they're supposed to be transporting glucose into the cells, but they don't, because APOE4 is binding them and sequestering them. And this is pretty recent work that was done. And so the end result of that is resistance to glucose metabolism. And so your body secretes more insulin to try to make up for that, and then you end up with insulin resistance, which is why APOE4 specifically is also a risk factor for metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes, because that tight receptor binding of APOE4 to the receptor. So that's a major mechanism. And in the brain, astrocytes are the ones that process glucose and deliver energy to neurons, and the astrocytes lose their ability to metabolize glucose, which is a problem and so that's thought to be one of the major mechanisms. It's an energy imbalance, failure to metabolize glucose. And so, your brain is literally starving. You can have a lot of glucose floating around in your blood, but paradoxically, your brain is not getting energy, and then it starts to atrophy. And this is what we see in Alzheimer's. You do an MRI scan, the brain gets atrophic, and we think that this glucose metabolism issue is a major part of it. But it's not the only part of it. As Jeannie was saying, it also involves the blood-brain barrier. And the other thing that we're talking about today is the ability for DHA to get into the brain and cross the blood-brain barrier. APOE4 plays a role in that by causing degeneration of the blood-brain barrier. So I hope that wasn't too much, but that's
well, I like that because I've been seeing a lot that high sugar, the diets that we have, and the role that glucose is playing in dementia, cognitive impairment, and AD, and I didn't really understand how. I mean, usually when people think of glucose, it goes to diabetes, like you said, but I didn't know how it affected the brain health. But Jeannie, I wanted to come back to you because you reached out to us because of Lysoveta, which has DHA in the LPC form, or lysophosphatidylcholine. What made you, like, how did you learn that was important, and then what made you look for that on Amazon and not find it?
Yeah. Although I do think it's available there now.
It is now.
Yeah. So I was reading about DHA, and I came across a article from Dr. Londa Patrick, and she was extrapolating that the only way to get DHA into the brain was through this MTHFR transporter, and that the only molecule of DHA that could go through there efficiently was LPC-DHA. So I was like, I'm going to get me some of that. So I went right over to Amazon thinking I could just get it like that, and it wasn't there. So I was like, well, where is it? This can't be that hard. And I had to really look and, and email you, because I was like, this is, the only place I can find, that I can find this product for my mom. And so that was the start of, learning about way more in the weeds than I had ever learned in school about, how, this particular omega-3 fatty acid gets into the brain. And I guess one thing I wanted to, if we could go way back to the beginning and just mention that the biggest genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's disease is APOE4, and the other thing is, so we used to think that the only reason why more women died Alzheimer's was because they lived longer, but now we know that's not the case. And we also know that, the signs and symptoms and the breakdown of the blood-brain barrier happen a lot earlier. And so that got me thinking that this MFSD2A transporter must have something to do with the decline of estrogen in women of a particular age, as they go through perimenopause into this. So that's kind of where I think we have a little bit more, way to go with our research, but I would love to just talk about that a little bit if I could.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that. I mean, since, traditionally, since women live longer, I wouldn't have thought that what you're saying is that women on average get Alzheimer's before men, if I understood correctly.
Well, what I'm saying is that women just get it more.
Oh, okay.
Give you a timeline. I'm just saying that women get it more than men. And, why are they getting it more? And what is happening to, cause this, change? And, I, you know, the more that I learn about this LPC-DHA, the more I think that it might be something that is going to be really major for Alzheimer's prevention. Because from my research, I read that APOE4 downregulates FADS1 and Stewart. If you know what these mean, please tell me. Right. FADS1, FADS2, and ELOVL2 key enzymes in the synthesis of long-chain omega-3s like DHA from dietary precursors. So APOE is downregulating those things, which are how we, without supplementation, get these into our brains. So
Okay.
we're not, so APOE4, so that could be a crucial mechanism for why APOE4 people are starved of DHA, which is a building block.
Well, and so this is where I've done a lot of research on omega-3 fatty acids, and that's what brought me into this. So as just for those who don't know the difference between omega-3 fatty acid, EPA, and DHA, DHA and EPA and ALA, they're all omega-3 fatty acids. What that means is that they have a double carbon bond, either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And every time you have a double carbon bond, the lipid gets a little bit more bent and crooked. And DHA has 6. So it's takes up a lot of space, and it helps with the fluidity of the cell membrane. When people say, let's eat walnuts for omega-3 fatty acids, that's rich in ALA. That has 1 double carbon bonds, but the body doesn't really do a very good job of adding more double carbon bonds. It's metabolically very expensive. So we get the double carbon bonds, EPA with 5 and DHA from our diet. And usually the highest sources of omega-3, the polyunsaturated fatty acids, are from fish, seafood, but the Western diet doesn't really consist of much of that. So most people get omega-3s from either fish oil or something else. And there are different forms of omega-3s. And there are different ways it gets to the brain, but when we started putting together supplements, we wanted the nutrients that actually made it to the brain, not one that you could just put on the label and say, "Oh, this is DHA," even though it's not a form that your body uses. And I can kind of relate to what you were saying, Jeannie. When I found out that LPC-DHA is the form that goes to the brain off of a study out of the University of Chicago in 2019, I was like, well, crap, that's what I want our products to have. And I went out and it didn't exist. And it was like 4.5 years before that was available. So I'm glad now for the people that like reading the scientific articles on omega-3s, there is actually something for that now. But Dr. Knoepp, why does DHA, why does LPC help for cognitive support where the other forms of DHA don't?
Well, let's back up just for a second. Talk about why do we want DHA in our brains, and what is DHA doing, and what's the purpose of this stuff? Brett, you hit on probably the major issue, which is membrane fluidity of cellular membranes. You mentioned that these double bonds cause the fatty acid to have a kink in it, to be a little bit crooked. And you're exactly right. That's the key. All of our cellular membranes are made out of these fatty acids. Every cell in our body are made out of these little fatty acids. It's going back to biology that we all took. It's the membrane lipid bilayer, and these are lipids. DHA is a lipid. So if you make a cellular membrane out of saturated fats, they're long and straight. They pack very tightly together, and the membrane is not fluid. But if you put DHA in there and other polyunsaturated fatty acids, they become very fluid. And why is that important? Well, looking in the brain, your brain, one of the main areas that DHA is required is synapses. The synapses are where neurons communicate with each other, and they're very, very metabolically active. So the synapse is just two cellular processes coming together where the membranes are very close to each other, and they're secreting neurotransmitters very rapidly. So a neurotransmitter is secreted into the synapse, fires, and then it has to be cleared from the synapse through pinocytosis and taken back up into the cell to recharge so it can fire again. And this is happening 100 to 200 times per second, depending on the cell type. So this is where you want all your DHA. And this is where the brain must have DHA in those synapses. It's an absolutely critical substance in all of our brains. And the brain is mostly fat. If the dry weight of brain is mostly fat, 60%. And lipids are just another name for fats. And DHA is a fat. And the number one fatty acid in your brain is DHA. And so at all levels of development, from being an embryo to being a child with a developing brain, all the way through adulthood and into old age, we need DHA the whole time. The developing fetus and kids with a growing brain, they really need it badly. And I'll describe the mechanism in a second, but I wanted to get to Jeannie's comment. She mentioned all the enzymes about synthesis of DHA from ALA, and ALA is a vegetable source like walnuts, that sort of thing. And Brett, you mentioned how that was not a very efficient conversion process, and you're correct. One thing that was discovered relatively recently is estrogen speeds up that process.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, estrogen speeds up that process. So one of the rate limiting steps of that whole process is delta-6 desaturase enzyme, which converts ALA into one of its, or the early precursors, which are then going to turn into DHA and EPA. That is greatly sped up by estrogen. And when a woman is pregnant, surprise, surprise, her estrogen is off the charts. Estrogen levels are very high. And so she is converting and creating a lot of DHA, which is critical for the brain in the fetus, which I think is so fascinating. And then on the opposite end, in older age, estrogen levels go down.
Well, in midlife.
Yeah.
In women's 40s.
So, and perimenopausal women. So I can tell you, this is anecdotal, but I know a number of people that are actually taking this Accentrate Omega Max, and one individual is in perimenopause who's been complaining about brain fog, and she's telling me that her brain fog is going away now that she's taking its Accentrate. So this is just an anecdote, but
I think more than an anecdote, I think what we are talking about right now is going to be something publishable.
Yeah.
Going to be something scientifically proven, and because women's health is so far behind, it's just not there yet.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, and so if I could finish my point before.
Yeah, please.
We'll check. Is that so? APOE4 downregulates FADS1, FADS2, and ELOB-L2, but estrogen upregulates those same things. So if we, in addition to giving people women Accentrate in their 40s, we also supplement their estrogen so they don't go through a precipitous dip in estrogen, then they're able to export the estrogen, exports the DHA through the MFS-D2A receptor efficiently into the brain. So that's my thesis, right?
Yeah, that's beautiful. And if I could just
You're lucky.
You're
lucky I'm a patent attorney, Jeannie. We're going to talk afterwards.
I mean, I think Jeannie's right. And I was, Brett, the first time you and I talked, I was very excited because I think this is big. I think this is really big. And I think a lot of people are going to realize they need this and it's going to help them. I'm really excited about it. But I just wanted to finish the thought mechanistically because I sort of, went into a lot of detail. But Brett, I never actually asked you a question. You were asking how does DHA get into the brain and how does APOE4 affect that? I mean, I think the main issue that we have is that APOE4 causes breakdown of the blood-brain barrier. The brain is in a protective space, and it doesn't mix with blood. Its neurons are fed by cerebrospinal fluid, which is much different than blood, and it's protected from blood. Blood has a lot of toxins and other things that are they're not toxic to the body, but they would be toxic to the brain. So the brain is a special protected space that's walled off by a blood-brain barrier. And so DHA and a lot of other needed nutrients for the brain don't just freely go across the blood-brain barrier. They have to be carried across. So we know there's at least two mechanisms via which DHA gets into the brain. One is so-called passive diffusion, where multiple different types of DHA, just free fatty acids bound to albumin, for example, can just passively diffuse across endothelial cells, across tight junctions into the brain. And this is what breaks down in APOE4 carriers more rapidly than in non-APOE4 carriers. They lose this ability to get DHA into the brain across tight junctions on endothelial cells, and this is the problem. So now but what remains intact is the receptor that Jeannie was talking about, the MFSD2A receptor, which is a symporter that carries the Lysopc-DHA form directly into these cells. And this remains intact in APOE4 carriers. But this is hard to get. And most supplements have none of this. Salmon has a little bit. The omega-3s in salmon, 1 to 3% is in this form. And then krill oil has some, a fair bit. And then fish eggs have quite a bit. But who eats fish eggs? Not many people. So, I think that I think a lot of people, when they find out, they're going to realize, gee, I'm not eating any fish eggs, and I'm maybe not eating enough salmon, and they have APOE4, and they're going to turn to Lysoveta, which you have, and this is krill oil, which has been treated with lipase and enriched for Lysopc-DHA, which targets that receptor. So, and then the one other thing I wanted to say, we were talking about membrane fluidity, is a more fluid cellular membrane can cycle receptors to the cellular membrane more easily. And those receptors, it can be any receptor, but one of those receptors is the glucose receptor, GLUT1, GLUT4. So this is a major mechanism. And I think a lot of the problems, when we're talking about getting into the nitty-gritty of the disease and how does this work, a lot of it is chicken and egg type thing. Every mechanism, is that the cause or is it the effect? It's maybe both. So, you need DHA to get receptors up to the surface so that you can get more DHA and more glucose, but yet the fact that you are not, is it the cause or the effect? I think it's both. Getting more DHA into the cell allows you to get more DHA into the cell and more glucose.
Well, I like it that you said chicken and egg, because this patent that I have hanging up here is for an enriched form of DHA from eggs. And I've been working on omega-3s for over 15 years, and it does kind of change your lifestyle. You said how many people eat fish eggs, and I have it with salmon all the time now. I never would have if I didn't look into how important omega-3s are. My kids, ever since they were little, will eat fish. I mean, they have salmon, and I can't do sardines. Like I think sardines and mackerel are the best forms, but or cheap, most affordable for the amount, and I can't do that. But I do kind of want to bring this back to like some of the things, whether it's eating enriched eggs, some of the other things, the other lifestyle choices that we can do that affect what's going on in our brain, whether it's eating more fish. Actually, you had said there was one type of fish in the north, like around the Great Lakes, that has a lot of DHA on a previous call.
Yeah. So the fish that everyone always talks about are the smash fish, SMASH, salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. So all those fish are really, really good. But really, it's any cold water fish is probably pretty good. And the fish I was talking about, I live in Michigan. It turns out lake trout from the Great Lakes is a very good source. And the colder water, the better. I read a publication by Oregon State University, and they looked at 200 different types of fish and marine animals to look at what were the highest in DHA and EPA and the omega-3s. And number one is lake trout, and specifically it's called a Siskiyou variety, which they source from, that lives in the deep waters of Lake Superior. So it's hard to get that if you want to get it, especially, to specify Siskiyou variety. But you can buy frozen lake trout from Canada if you want to go that route. If you like that sort of thing, you can get it. But and I think that's useful. Yeah, since we're on this subject, we should include leave the skin on. I was eating the skin because the layer of fat is right underneath the skin. And for years and years, when I ate salmon, I would throw the skin away. My kids would definitely throw the skin away, and our dogs would eat it. And we have very smart dogs, by the way. And now I'm in but don't do that. Like, you have to eat the skin ideally, and if it's been scaled and cooked properly, then
that saves so much trouble. Usually it's cheaper if it has the scale on, and then it's so, like, I'm always trying to get like
1%.
just
Well,
I'm sorry, what?
but go on, yeah.
Oh, no. Like, I think that I don't think I'm gonna get my kids to eat that, but that makes it easier for me, for sure. The other thing that Jeannie and I had talked about, and this is where you know a lot more than I do, on the MTHFR, which is another genetic condition which affects homocysteine metabolism. It affects folate metabolism, and when you have B6, B12, and folate, that helps with nitric oxide, which helps blood flow and getting blood to the brain, which helps. Can you tie in those ideas, Jeannie, on how MTHFR and how that affects with brain health as well, in the spirit of there are lifestyle choices and nutrients that we can take control over?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in the MTHFR enzyme. I do a lot of testing on my patients to see if they often metabolize folate and folic acid. So this gene basically tests, and this gene basically helps us know how a person is metabolizing folate and folic acid. And folic acid is something that's supplemented in all of our, like enriched flour in this country, and in a lot of cereal, and even in some rice. So it's in bread, pasta, and things like that.
It's everywhere.
It's unpacked, it's been enriched, and but there was a good reason behind it, and it was because they found out in, I think, the 60s, that if you enrich these foods with folic acid, which is the synthetic creation in the lab, if you enrich foods with it, then women will be eating that as maybe not as they get pregnant, but, shortly before and shortly after. And that will help the new baby to have enough folic acid, which will be converted into folate, that it will be using, because folate is used in like energy things. So like when you're rapidly multiplying and dividing cells, you need a lot of folate. So that helps to prevent a really terrible condition called spina bifida. And so you don't really have a lot of people with spina bifida at a young age anymore. And I'm still certainly have people with it. Not as many babies are born. But some of us, I know with my Irish and Italian heritage, it's almond. Some of us have 1 or 2 copies of the 677T. So we have 2 copies of a T, so we're TT, homozygous. And that means that we're about 70 to 80% less able or efficient at taking folic acid and turning it into folate. I might have that wrong. Maybe it's even folate when I was doing that. But I know that we are really terrible at metabolizing folic acid. But the problem is we can eat it all we want, right? And it's going to actually slip right into the cell. And then the cell's going to say, oh, what do we have here? Some folate? Oh, looks pretty close to folate to me. And then it tries to eat it up. And then it can't do it. So it spins around and around and around. And it actually almost like scrambles the egg inside of the cell until it's so hot that it becomes thermolabile and it annihilates everything in the cell and it explodes contents, which can be very, very toxic to the rest of the surrounding cells. And so if you're constantly eating that stuff, you're constantly having this thermolabile reaction. And one of the cells that's the most, that I found, that is the most vulnerable to this kind of thermolabile explosion is dopamine. So that's why psychiatry, I test the MTHFR gene, because if someone's, having dopamine splatters all over the brain, it's actually cytotoxic. And,
That's really interesting, because there are studies showing that people with MTHFR have higher incidences of ADHD, and that makes sense to me, since ADHD is largely has to do with the dysregulation of dopamine. But it kind of this is another trade-off. We have the enriched foods and enriched folic acid, which have helped prevent neurotube defects. But then you have, as you said, folic acid is essentially an oxidized form of folate, so that it can sit in a product, in a supplement, or in the food. So we're solving one problem, but then we have another problem. And it's kind of like, as people are living longer, we are having more issues with the chronic, or with early cognitive impairment and dementia. But what's causing that is a lot of times the environment that we have. So we have environment with more plastic and more toxins, which supposedly kill off the bacteria. So we're not dying of microbial diseases anymore, and we are living longer. But then what's causing that is creating other problems later.
And so we can have things that have the natural form, like if you're getting at, folate, and so you can get folate from eggs, egg yolks, and leaky dreams. I think of anything else, but those are my go-tos. I think even some lentils.
Yeah, and some red meats do have it, but it's leafy green vegetables. I had a chemistry. My genetics professor said that, if you eat leafy green vegetables and broccoli, then you won't get cancer. But if you live long enough, you're ultimately going to develop enough mutations that just tends to happen because we're living longer. But I kind of want to, as we kind of tie things up, focus on the behavioral things that we can do. Eating more omega-3 fatty acid supplements if you don't like fish, leafy green vegetables. What other types of lifestyle choices help with someone who has APOE4? And also I want to bring back to, like, if for women who are postmenopausal and have less estrogen, are there other things other than just taking estrogen that you can do to help with these things?
Well, if they were 10 years of menopause, then I would still suggest that they contact their NP or MD and they consider getting on estrogen. So there's like the long window. The average age of menopause is 51 in America. So we're talking about someone up to the age of 61, maybe still qualifying to be on estrogen replacement therapy, which will shuttle the LPC-DHA into the brain. And so I think that that's the first thing I would do. But, also we can increase our BDNF, which is a brain-derived neurotropic factor. And so the ways that we can increase that, because what we really want to do is we want to increase the brain volume, because as we go through menopause and, in short, just through life, our brains get smaller. And so we need to slump up the brain as big as we can. So one of the things we can do is we can increase that molecule by doing things like games and things that will stimulate our cognition. So doing something like that every day is learning something new. Sounds funny, but there's a real reason why people say to learn a new language or play an instrument or learn about a new molecule. And the other thing we can do to get that is we can exercise. Aerobic exercise really can increase that level too. So it's another way to help, I think, the brain stay healthy.
And with the exercise, it's as far as I understand, it's getting the oxygen to the brain and feeding the brain.
Do you have any other tips?
I mean, that's beautiful. I couldn't agree more. I'm glad you mentioned estrogen replacement therapy, because, we mistakenly, the healthcare system recommended against that for a long time, thinking it caused breast cancer, but it's just really not good information. And I read a book recently by Marty Macri, and he tells that story very well about how that was bad information that we got. I think if you have a uterus, you should have estrogen plus progesterone. But basically, there's really not a concern with breast cancer and estrogen replacement therapy. So I think folks ought to know that. Although, this isn't, people should consult with their physicians. This is just my general understanding of it. But yeah, I agree with absolutely everything you said. And exercise is maybe the most important thing that all of us could do at any time. I've really done a lot of deep dives on the different ways that exercise help the brain and help the rest of the body. There's so much good information coming out on that right now, and it's like an endless, infinite well of information how exercise helps that. And I like to think of exercise as being multiple different things. You have aerobic activity, you have strength training, and you have intense workouts, and you have more mild workouts. So aerobic, it can be intense, it can be mild, and then you have strength training, which is different. And really, you need all three. They're all different. They're all different mechanisms. There are benefits that come with each of those different activities. So I try to mix it up. Just to give a couple mechanisms that I really like that I think are germane to the conversation we're having. Going back to insulin resistance, so-called insulin resistance of the brain, and the inability of the brain to utilize glucose and APOE4 carriers that have that. We were blessed with also being able to metabolize ketones and fats as a fuel source. We don't have to rely on glucose. We can rely on ketones. And so, there's a lot that's been written about ketogenic diets. One small point there is not all ketogenic diets are the same. So, you will see some people say, oh, ketogenic diet is bad. It's bad for your health. And then when you actually read the source, the study, they were feeding Crisco to rats. And so that's their ketogenic diet. No, that's not a good diet. So don't eat
It's a
Crisco.
little excessive. I
You have
will
to
say,
eat healthy fats. But I was just going to say that that you can when you exercise, you produce lactate, and lactic acid. We've all run really hard, and then you get sore, and that's why you're supposed to stretch after you work out, so you get the lactic acid out of your muscles. We've all heard that, right? Well, that lactate is like a ketone, and that substance goes directly to your brain. It has its own receptor, the MCT receptor. It goes to your brain, and it's used by astrocytes and neurons as fuel directly. And so that fuels your brain. It also stimulates angiogenesis at the blood-brain barrier. So it may play a role in healing the blood-brain barrier. And so that's just one little mechanism of exercise right there that is pertinent to APOE4 carriers that I think is cool. And we ought to all think about that when we are kind of hating whatever we're doing. Sometimes when I go for a run and I'm trying to beat that time, I'm kind of miserable and pissed off. And so I like to have these thoughts to carry me through. Maybe it's helping.
I can totally relate with that. But when you started, I just want to throw out that, I'm pretty sure that all of us are listening to Rhonda Patrick's podcast because she's talking about those same
I
things.
know.
You're not? Well,
I used to listen like 2014.
okay.
Like it's only a decade.
Well, she used to. I mean, she was actually how I first started hearing of omega-3s in the phospholipid form back in 2014. But she is talking a lot about exercise and the aerobic aspect and I don't know if she gets into ketones, but when I was doing a ketogenic diet, and I still kind of do a bit of intermittent fasting, I don't have breakfast. So I'm burning ketones. And when I started doing that in the morning, I don't need as much coffee because the ketones, you feel way more awake when your brain's fueled on ketones, in my experience.
Yeah, I think that there's something to that. And I think, if you have any kind of insulin resistance in your brain at all, I think this is very likely why you feel better when you're in a ketogenic mode, because you're bypassing all that. Suddenly your neurons are being fed. I think that plays a role. But yeah, no, I echo your sentiment about Rhonda Patrick. I mean, I think when it comes to, before we met today, I pulled up a couple of her videos. She has so many videos on just omega-3s. She's an omega-3 aficionado, and I love her information. She's very good. She researches it so extremely well. She explains it very well. She's passionate about it. And she talks about exercise too, but there's a lot of really good podcasters that are doing this. And Peter Attia as well. He talks a lot about the exercise. I love his work, and the science is really clear. So yeah, with you on that for sure.
And it's all boiling down to what we were told when we were little: eat healthy, exercise, sleep right, and the basic fundamentals have just not changed.
Definitely.
Yet it's still just as hard to get my kids to eat well, sleep right, and exercise.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure they're doing well, though.
No, they are. And, you just have to make it fun. I think, you found running as a way of, for me, it was a time to, get my thinking done in the morning. And with kids, it's just finding what they like. Boys like playing sports, so you find the right sport. And my oldest, he's in track, just finished up as a senior. He was having kind of a hard week this week. He was like, oh, man. Had my last track meet, graduate in a couple weeks, all these life-changing things happening. My other son plays soccer. My daughter played soccer. But there is a form of exercise that everyone can enjoy, even if it's walking, because outside can, well, depending, can be enjoyable, and you just need to have that time to think and to be calm.
Or to connect. Like, so, as much as I care about young people, I think people in midlife and older are the ones that, I really want to get this message, because they don't have as much time left, to take action. And so, with aqua aerobics, something that, incorporates like socializing with like group of people every week is another great way to combine socializing with exercise. And, I've done some, what we want to, highlight is that the neoplastic, the way that the brain can remodel and to build itself through exercise is actually enhanced if there's, conversation or communication or camaraderie or music and like a beat, like things like that also really enhance that experience. So, there's a lot of different opportunities.
Well, there are, and I would really like. I mean, I've enjoyed talking with both of you, and I kind of hope to be able to do it again. As Jeannie said, like the studies that are being done on LPC right now are new. People haven't been taking it for a very long time, and I'd like to hear how it goes with people that or after there's more feedback, so that we can talk more about how, who it's best for and what kind of outcomes you're seeing. Um, but I appreciate both of your time, and as we get better at putting these podcasts, I'd love for you guys both to come back.
I'd love to come back. Yeah, this was a blast. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Likewise. And nice meeting with you, Jeannie. And thanks, Brett. Yeah, absolutely. Love to give you an update as we find out more. It's very exciting.
Jeannie's got a great LinkedIn presence, posting a lot of really timely material. And some of it recently, I was shocked. Like, how is this? There's a lot of really good timely stuff coming up that I've liked. And Stewart, had mentioned once that you were doing a paper on this.
Well, I'm working on a review article, and it's not complete, but working on a few things right now. But I'll definitely keep you posted
Yeah,
when I get that done for sure. So I hope to have it done pretty soon. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah.